Being tricky is a game that can cause you more harm than good and has led a lot of people to their doom. This is a true-life tragic story of a family. Come with me as I share with you a story of 3 young girls who murdered their own grandmother. These young girls happen to be teenagers who are filled with life and a thirst for adventure. They live with their parents and other siblings. Pampered by their parents, they always seem to have their way around what they want, and they do as they please. One day, their parents decided to send them off to spend the holidays with their grandmother. They were so excited to go spend the holidays with her, and soon they departed. They departed for their hometown where their grandmother lives, and after some horse drive, they arrived at their grandmother's home. She was so happy to have them spend some time with her. But as the days went by, they got bored. It turns out that their grandmother is a bit strict and doesn't allow parties or late nights. But that was exactly what they wanted so badly. But they know she wouldn't help them. With this in mind, the 3 girls hatched a plan to sneak out of the house at night while their grandmother was asleep. But then, they had just one problem. Their grandmother isn't a heavy sleeper, and she doesn't sleep much at night because she spends most of her nights praying. So how are they going to sneak out unnoticed with such a big challenge? It was nearly impossible to sneak out unnoticed. But then, an idea strikes one of them. She said to the other 2, "Why not spike her drink? That way, she would sleep through the late hours while they're away, and by the time she's awake, they would have returned home." Thrilled with this idea, they all agreed to do just that. With that in mind, they begin to make preparations for their plan. They got some drugs and a soda drink because they knew how much their grandmother loved soda. They added the drugs in and gave them to their grandmother. When they handed it to her, the old woman was so happy and grateful. She thanked them for their thoughtfulness as she accepted the soda, after which they all exited her room. They went back to their room and got ready for the party. When they were done dressing up, they decided to check on their grandmother to see if she was asleep already. And as expected, when they entered her room, she was indeed asleep. Proud of their accomplishment, they allowed the woman to sleep in peace and left for the party. They had so much fun and explored so many places. They returned home afterward and went to bed. In the morning, they woke up and decided to go to their grandmother's room to say their greetings to her like they usually do. But on getting to her room, they found out she was still asleep, so they decided not to disturb her. They went back to their room, and not long after that, their mother called to check on them. After checking on them and making sure they were all right, she asked of their grandmother, and they told her she was still asleep. Their mother was surprised because she knew their grandmother isn't the type that sleeps too much, but they assured her she was fine. With her daughter's assurance, she decided to allow the old woman to sleep and decided to call her back later. A few hours passed, and their mother decided to call her mother again to see if she's awake yet. But she was still not answering, and that got her worried. She then waited a bit more and called again, but there was still no response. At this point, the mother became really worried and decided to call the girls again to find out what is truly happening. As she asked them about the grandmother's whereabouts, they decided to go back to her room and check up on her. On getting there, they found out she was still asleep and were worried too. And that's where their nightmare began. They tried waking her up, but she wasn't waking up. They kept on calling her name and shaking her, but she was motionless. She wasn't breathing, and that was when they began panicking. They began crying and thinking of the possibility of what could have happened. They were all scared, and that's when it occurred to them that they had spiked her drink the previous night. Slowly, realization began to dawn on them. It turns out that they overdosed the drink given to the old woman with the pills, and that resulted to her death. They didn't know how to break the news to their parents and were confused as to what their punishment would be. Could they be charged with murder? Or would the incident be considered a mistake and be overlooked? But most importantly, would they ever be able to forgive themselves and move on? I'd like to know what you think about this in the comments section. This unfortunate event happened as a result of their selfish desires, which is why we shouldn't do something we want at the expense of someone else's safety or feelings, simply because we want to favor ourselves. If they hadn't drugged the old woman just for a night's fun, she wouldn't have died the way she did. Another lesson to pick from this is the everlasting consequence of a single action. Yes, they had fun on their night out, but at what cost? They put themselves in so much trouble and at the same time caused their whole family so much pain. This is why, It's important to think things through thoroughly before executing, because once the deed is done, it can never be undone. And for parents, it is important to bring up the younger generation well to prevent them from getting themselves into too much trouble, because whatever trouble they get into affects us either directly or indirectly. I hope this story is helpful to anyone seeing this. Stay connected for more juicy and enlightening true life stories from Authentic Tales.